And yet the more I learn about the vaccines in the industry from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or a whole slew of people from Judy Mikovits to Dr. Tenpenny, the more I realize how flawed that system is. And I got Dr. Andrew Wakefield on tomorrow. And, you see the movies and you're starting to learn that, there's all sorts of problems in the execution of that science. There's this lack of liability, lack of accountability, and also the fact that vaccines aren't these panaceas, and yet we're all being kind of corralled into this is the solution, and this is how you get your freedom back. This is how you can travel. This is how you can go to concerts. And yet it all just doesn't make sense. And we're also being told we're going to fast track it, and then everything's going to be okay. Curious what you think here, Zach, because there's a lot of big question marks here.
It has to be fast tracked. If they don't get a vaccine on the market by January, then they're going to be exposed. The reason is because this thing is going to be gone next year. And we know that because every other coronavirus pandemic we have disappears within 2 seasons. And so with the conclusion of this next respiratory flu season, which is a carbon particulate season, not a flu season, but as we get done with that next season, next June, this will be done. And I'm that confident because that's exactly what happened with SARS and MERS. And so this being another, version of that same corona phenomenon, we're going to develop a relationship to this virus over the next, 12 months really from now, where we're not going to see this being a prevalent piece of biology at all. And we're going to reach this homeostasis. It's often called herd immunity, but again, that's a mistake in believing that the immune system fought off all of this DNA all over the world. That's impossible. Our immune system is limited to our bloodstream and our skin and everything, and so it stops here. We can't eradicate viral genomic information. First of all, it's not alive, so you can't kill it, and so it needs to disassemble itself through basically oxidation or corrosion, the same way that metal takes itself apart by rusting. Viruses will disassemble in natural systems over a period of time. But the belief that you have to somehow fight these things is erroneous, because it's just impossible for us to change that genomic environment around us. And in fact, everything you've heard so far, I hope you're starting to get the realization of why would we want to block coronavirus from our system? Coronavirus is an important update, and people will say, well, this one's happens to be made by a military lab. Well, it sure looks a hell of a lot like the last coronaviruses. And so if they did change it, it was minuscule shift. And people were like, well, look at how few people had SARS. Well, it's because we didn't test the world with PCR to look for SARS. And so we have this extremely limited, viewpoint into what SARS was. It wasn't 9,000 people that died with that virus in there. 9,000 people were diagnosed to happen to have it, but it's impossible that only 9,000 people, because it was multifocal. It was all over Europe, and there was in the US and came out of the Middle East with MERS. These things are multifocal. There's no way that just 9,000 people get exposed and then die. That's impossible. The population sees these things, and we reach a homeostasis balance. The vast majority of us will see that and never even let the virus reproduce in our cells. And so it's important to know, when you start to think about vaccines, that RNA viruses are short-lived in their imbalance with the human biology. It's going to reach a balanced state. And it's not because we fought it off, it's because we reached balance. And so there is no herd immunity for viruses. That is a false belief. It is actually a balanced state. And the way that we reach balance doesn't have much to do with the antibodies, it turns out. Antibodies can be a small piece of the puzzle as to how we reach this balance. But the main thing that's emerging around viruses is that the primary tool that we use to make sure that we neither maybe perhaps even express the virus in the first place, so we're exposed, comes into our bloodstream, enters a cell, instead of reproducing that virus, we simply chop up the DNA with this enzyme within our cell that is always looking for RNA and DNA from viruses and chopping it up before we start to reproduce it. Interestingly, we can poison that enzyme, especially the genomics beneath that enzyme, with Roundup. And so when we see high populations or density in areas of high spraying of Roundup, we can be sure we're poisoning the genetic sequence that will make the enzyme that will clip up the DNA. And so if we want to see health emerge and this coronavirus and all other respiratory viruses go into a much lower state of dysfunction during those winter months, we need to make sure that everybody's getting connected to a much healthier soil system where they have access to the amino acids that will build that enzyme. But Roundup blocks the amino acid production at the soil system in plants so that we can't get the building blocks for the scissors that will clip up the DNA when it enters our cell. And so when you now realize that the antibody is a very, very late event in the course of control and balance for viral expression within our bodies, you know we're chasing the wind with a virus, or with a vaccine. Even if we got a vaccine that worked, quote unquote, saying that it didn't kill people, even if we found a safe vaccine, it would have to be a Band-Aid on the surface of a pandemic. It cannot prevent a pandemic because it's not getting at the root cause of this balanced state that's being eroded by poisoning of our food system through herbicides and pesticides. And so we will continue to have pandemics. We will continue to have expression of disease and dysfunction and death as we undermine these natural biologic systems that should have us in a homeostatic balance with nature. And so the vaccine is a Band-Aid at best, and terrifyingly, all the RNA vaccines we've ever created tend to do something called a superantigen effect, where we actually hypersensitize that person to the future exposure to that. And when they do get exposed, they die really quickly from an overwhelming immune response to that antigen. And so we are potentiating death for the next coronavirus if, in fact, we allow an RNA virus to go on. That's the history of RNA viruses, and it's already been seen in those first couple of clinical trials with these fast-tracking vaccines that got put straight into humans. Even in the low-dose category, we created hypersensitization. People are going to die from corona for the first time if we allow that vaccine to go into practice. Right now, people are dying from consequences of hypoxia related to the entry of the virus, but they're not dying from the virus. They're dying weeks later from complications of toxic hypoxia and bacterial infection. They're not dying from the virus. But with that vaccine, we will start to die by our reaction to the virus itself. And I think we would see the very first true COVID deaths on the tail end of a vaccination program worldwide. And so we have a Band-Aid that's going to, by its biology, put us at risk for a much worse, relationship to the viral genome as a whole. And terrifyingly, it doesn't just stop at coronavirus. In fact, we know in a military study in the United States in 2017 that the influenza vaccine, once given, predisposes people to 6 other respiratory infections in the next couple of years, including coronavirus. And so if we had really thought in December that there was a new virus coming that had a 30% mortality, which was some of those early estimates, or even a 3% mortality, which would be 30 times or fold that of the flu, and 250 million people dying worldwide would have been a lucky number if all of those numbers were true. If that had been true, and we really cared about the population, we would have immediately cessated all influenza vaccines. We were told the whole population, do not get your flu vaccine this year. We have a coronavirus going, and yet we never put that information out there. You never see the CDC or anybody saying, don't take your influenza vaccine this year. So we have a corruption of information because, and I believe the reason that can get done is they were afraid that if they told people not to take it now, then there would be some critical questioning of, well, why are we going to take it next year then, And so they were afraid of creating fear of the vaccine, so they didn't tell us the truth. And so it was, again, it's altruistic at some level of the mind. And so some sort of subconscious or conscious effort to override rational thought with this altruistic belief that we need people to be vaccinated. And yet all of the studies of flu have been unbelievable. Like, you have to dissect down the data insanely before you can find any group that has a decreased mortality with the advent of influenza vaccines. It's usually elderly people between 75 and 78, or middle-aged men between the age of 45 and 65. They'll find in every study some little niche within their study population that actually seemed to have a statistical significant improvement, and then they publish it like it was a great success. But the Cochrane review that was done in 2012 at the NIH showed that there was no change in the advent of influenza infection with the vaccine. There was no change of rate of infection. The only thing they could measure a benefit to was maybe 6 hours less of symptoms if you were a middle-aged man between the age of 45 and 55 and got this, maybe had 6 hours less of symptoms from your flu reaction. But amazingly, we keep believing that this thing is saving people's lives. It can't be saving lives because, again, any virus is a genetic expression of need within the body to change the terrain. And if we disrupt that terrain modification, we're going to make it prone to other infections and disease downstream. I have concerns that that's going to include cancer. Every vaccine that we put out, and we not understanding how it screws up our relationship to the natural microbiome. I already told you the data of how cancer emerges from an unbalanced microbiome. If we keep vaccinating our children and changing their relationship to the ecosystem, we are going to see the most explosive cancer in history, and we already are. We have built, if you want any doubt to this, go down to Houston and visit Texas Children's Hospital. It is a literal city of size skyscrapers housing our children with cancer. And so it's the biggest economy outside of oil in Houston now. And so it's tragic that we are undermining the fabric of nature to justify a response to a fear paradigm. And in so doing, we will go extinct. And yet it's so simple to solve in the end. We just need to wake up.